most of you know I'm a Pan-Africanist. I'm a revolutionary Pan-African nationalist. Each of those have meaning. You've heard about the revolutionary. The meaning of Pan-Africanism, for those of you that don't know, we'll explain it more in this show. And nationalism will also discuss that. But in the sixfold stages to mental freedom, while assimilation is ground bottom, not all Blacks in the US and throughout the world go through this stage, but a lot of us do. I did, Dr. Obenga did. Many Blacks in this country go through what's called Black identity, which a lot of us put down. That's the culture of our people. And that's why when the African from the United States is talking to an African from another part of the world, they may ask them, are you Black? By that, they mean, are you from here? Because it's not just the color of the skin they're talking about their identity, and it's shaped based on their culture. We're going to talk about that today. But the highest levels in the sixfold stages to mental freedom have to do with African identity and then revolutionary African consciousness. So the African identity is very important. African American culture is grounded in African culture with new elements. And of course, we know intrusions that we don't like, that we have to get rid of, that we in the 60s called Negroisms, you know. A lot of them trace back to the plantation, and then some of them are coming in as a result of the forces that have hit our community since '68 that I call a choice between two cultures. And some of these have been really lethal and deadly, and we can find them operating on our people globally. So this show and the next one will be focusing on Pan-Africanism. And Pan-Africanism is an outgrowth, as you'll see, of African people from the United States and the Caribbean. You'll see that. We'll get into that. But the key point to get is when this idea was formulated through a route that I'll discuss in a minute, the people who formulated it were very African. That is, the enslaved Africans that a lot of us haven't really studied. And so the transformations in their consciousness will lead to a number of developments, one of which is Pan-Africanism. So the topic for today is Pan-Africanism, the gift of Blacks in the United States and the Western Hemisphere, specifically the Caribbean, to Africa. Those who say and still argue we don't have a culture, well, we'll be discussing one of the most advanced and new aspects of this culture, Pan-Africanism, and the thing that gives it birth that I'll spend most of my time on this morning. When we interviewed Dr. Theophil Obenga, some of you were probably surprised to see, and many of you who are really conscious were pleased to see the level of support and collaboration going on between continents. In this case, between Dr. Theophil Obenga, one of my great masters, Dr. Jacob Carruthers, Professor James Smalls, Dr. Wade Nobles, Dr. Rosalind Jeffries, Dr. Leonard Jeffries' wife, who is a specialist in African art history, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Professor John Henry Clark, Dr. Joseph Ben Yochanan, and many, many others, too many to name. Professor Bulanlela Wabogo that he referred to, who was teaching out at San Francisco State and helped me develop the sixfold stages to mental freedom. So those collaborations, you could call them intellectual or cultural, they're an expression of Pan-Africanism. In this case, collaborating while Dr. Obenga was here, it's between continents. So that could be viewed as just an intellectual conversation. But that it could happen is an expression of Pan-African consciousness and the fact that we see ourselves as being together. I don't want to get into the definition of Pan-Africanism yet, but it's an expression of that. And then the fact that we could hire Dr. Obenga here, for example, or Kwame Nkrumah could come to the United States and go to university here in the United States, a Black college, and then interchange with Africans in the United States. Again, it's a part of this Pan-African legacy that stands on a particular foundation. And for those that didn't know it, the interview with Dr. Theophile Obenga was broadcast from Congo, Brazzaville. The reason we couldn't have it the week before is he was in Congo, Kinshasa, which is the big Congo, the neighboring to Congo, Brazzaville, and they had spillover from the conference, so they couldn't do the workshop. So that was coming directly from Africa. For those of you that didn't know, because I told somebody, I thought they knew this. Yeah, it was from Africa. And so it was important that Dr. Obenga acknowledged that at least his mind was fertilized by the thought of the African University, which I know he had probably already had through these discussions, and especially of all of them, Dr. Jacob Carruthers, because that was a passion of his. He wanted to see the establishment of an African university. So this is an example of the kind of dialogue that we need to have. Now, I'm a Pan-Africanist, and I have contacts all over the world. And in fact, as a Pan-Africanist, and we have a good listening audience from the United Kingdom, I've been working in the United Kingdom now since 1974, and working with the Pan-African Congress movement, working with African people in the UK, in the beginning, coming out of the 6th Pan-African Congress, where they sent a delegation, and I chaired the political committee to the 6th Pan-African Congress for North America, the most important committee at the 6th Pan-African Congress. And they had a brother named Ron Phillips, who was a spokesperson for their delegation. He was an engineer from Guyana and gave the best speech delivered by an African in the diaspora that is outside of Africa. And so I've had this collaboration going on with a Pan-African collaboration around work. We did work around African Liberation Day, and we've done work on other things. People from the UK would come to the US and they would support our African Liberation Days. We had the largest in the US, 25 to 30,000 every year for about 8 years, under the leadership of the Pan-African Secretariat and the Pan-African People's Organization that I'm proud to still be a part of, founded and chaired. It's a successor to the Congress of Racial Equality. And a lot of Garvey's ideas influenced that, especially economic self-reliance. Our money comes from our people. So Pan-Africanism is at my root. So when I'm talking about this isn't just an intellectual discussion. My wife is from Barbados. I'm in a Pan-African marriage. I met my wife while I was in the United Kingdom speaking on behalf of the anniversary, the 60th anniversary of the 5th Pan-African Congress. And I spoke in Manchester, where the 5th Pan-African Congress was held. The last house I stayed in was my wife's house. That's the benefits of Pan-Africanism, by the way. Some love. In fact, I'm dedicating this show today to Norma Lynch, my wife, Pamela Hurley T'Shaka's mother, who passed away a few days ago, a lady from Barbados, beautiful lady, retired nurse, a mother of 3 children, actually 4, one, two, three, well, three children, a great woman. So Pan-Africanism is in my blood. And then, as we're going to see, Garvey was a central force in the Pan-African movement. What you see here is a book, Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, or Africa for the Africans. This is one of the original 300 books published by the Universal Negro Improvement Association while Garvey was in prison, framed by the FBI. And I purchased this and the second volume from Louis Michaud's bookstore, which was the University of the Community of Harlem and the university in which Malcolm studied. He would fall asleep in the stacks of books there. And as a chair of the Congress of Racial Equality, I'd go to New York and stay usually at the Harlem YMCA and see James Brown perform after Central Committee meetings. And I would always go by Michaud's bookstore because I had undergone an awakening in '63 and Garvey became my first master. And so I'd ask Michaud if he had any copies of Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey. He finally found 2 volumes, $100. Now that was around 1964, and $100 was like 800 now. And I managed to scrape it together. And this book sits on a guarded shelf in my library. Nobody's allowed to touch it. It's like almost a Bible for me. So Garveyism. Garvey's my first master. He was one of the most advanced Pan-Africanists, though he didn't use the term. So Pan-Africanism is in my blood, it's in my heart, it's in my soul. As you may gather, I love Black folks, African people, wherever they are, and I love Africa. I love Africa. As I've told you before, I spent time in the villages in Africa, meeting with African leaders, doing organizing, intellectual exchanges, political, whatever. So this discussion also springs from experience, and it's part of Pan-Africanism, the thought that has helped to shape my own consciousness.